Well, each year on May 25, Africans around the globe celebrate Africa Day. The day commemorates the founding of the first Union of African countries in 1963. It's exactly 60 years since the formation of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, which is now called the African Union. Now, to talk to us about the significance of the day, we're now joined via Zoom by Thembisa Fakude, a senior research fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues. Thank you so much for your time and happy Africa Day to you. I believe you're celebrating in Doha.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Yes, indeed.
Fantastic. Now, if, on this conversation, and of course, looking at the significance of the formation of the OAU, now the AU, if one had to give critical analysis just on the strides the AU has made in as far as Africa's development is concerned, especially looking at its vision, how would you say it's fared in fighting, for instance, colonialism and promoting a united African front?
I think in that regard, Africa has done well, particularly when it comes to multilateralism on economic matters, trying to link Africa and facilitating free flow of business within Africa. I think it has done very well. The fact that we have the African Union in Ethiopia that continues to represent Africa outside Africa, that in itself has also been very constructive. We've seen the AU also been very active in terms of trying to solve problems between African countries and intra-national strikes that we continue seeing. Currently, the AU is playing a critical role in ensuring that the wars that are affecting many countries in Africa are stopped. So in that regard, we have seen a movement. What we have not seen a movement in is the change of culture, political culture in particular in Africa, particularly when it comes to coups, when it comes to wars that continue affecting a number of African countries at the moment. That we have not seen being eliminated. And the other thing is there's also been the shortage or the dwindling of the African leadership. Whereas before you had at least 3 or 5 very strong leaders from different parts of Africa who could easily troubleshoot and intervene whenever there were problems in various African countries. We see that at the moment reducing, unfortunately. The old statesmen that used to lead Africa are no longer there, and many of them have, of course, passed away, but some of them are also getting old. But we don't see a new generation of African leadership that's assuming or picking up the torch that has been left by the old generation of leaders. You
touched on conflict in the region. Let's talk about that. The AU's also been criticized in its role in solving conflict in some regions on the continent. I know you mentioned a few where they had shown some significant gains. But let's take what is currently happening in Sudan as an example. I mean, is the AU exerting its power and influence in certain regions where we are seeing some shortfalls?
I think the AU has been undermined when it comes to Sudan. The Sudanese and the North Africans in particular have never given credence or importance to the AU. The fact that these negotiations of trying to achieve peace between the two warring parties, the Sudanese army and the RSF, are taking place in Saudi Arabia, led by the Saudis and Americans. That in itself, for me, is an indictment on the AU, that the AU has not been taken serious for whatever reason by the North African countries. But on other countries in Africa, the AU has been very, very active. But it has been more active in terms of facilitating, as I've said earlier, on economic activities and the free flow of business in Africa. But I think it still struggles to negotiate and mediate whenever there is conflict in various African countries.
Let's talk about conflict elsewhere on the globe now. President Cyril Ramaphosa took today's celebrations, just to again reaffirm South Africa's position as it relates to Russia, saying that the country remains firm in its position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and also reiterating that the country will not be drawn into global contests. Just your response to that.
Well, South Africa has decided, of course, they insist that they have this non-aligned position, but the actions have been indicating something different. Many countries around the world have criticized South Africa for its position, not only that it has abstained in voting at various important gatherings at the UN, but it has gone ahead to hold military drills with Russia. Yeah, it has done so with the United States in the past, but these military drills that we've had recently coincided with the commemoration of 12 months since the war started in Ukraine. So it was more rubbing salt to the wound. And we've had the claims from Ruben Bigetti, the US ambassador, on some of the consignment, whether it was sanctioned by government or not, ammunition that was loaded in that ship, Lady R, that was docked in Simonstown, and those ammunition, we are told, were sent to Russia in order to facilitate or continue supporting Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. So we're not sitting good at the moment. We know that South Africa has initiated this move with 5 other countries that will be joining President Cyril Ramaphosa to try and achieve some semblance of peace in that part of the world. But then in itself, African Union is outside the fold. We don't know why this very important initiative is not headed by the African Union. One would have thought that an initiative backed by 54 African countries would have communicated seriousness, but instead we see 6 African countries led by President Cyril Ramaphosa going to Ukraine and Russia. It's a good thing, but we don't know how much involved is the African Union. So South Africa continues, of course, to resuscitate its position and cleanse itself from criticism. But whether the 6 countries, including South Africa, will make any difference at the moment, we'll have to wait and see.
Mr. Fakude, as we wrap the conversation, particularly around just some of the gains, that we are seeing in Africa and on the continent, let's look at the African Continental Free Trade Area. I mean, that is, a positive area, as it were. As it forms part of improvement and its significance to Africa's economic integration, what would it take for this implementation to succeed?
I think it's a huge initiative. It also needs a partnership within African countries, particularly, there was an idea at some point of building a railway line from Cape to Cairo and also from East to West Africa to facilitate business. So I think these kind of initiatives, we might not necessarily see their successes in our lifetime, but the fact that we've got policies in place that seeks to promote business within Africa, that in itself, I think, is very positive. And I think with time, we're going to see African economies improving. We're going to see beneficiation within Africa. Countries such as South Africa with very advanced infrastructure are likely to benefit because of these multilaterals and economic bilaterals that have been signed between African countries. So the future is bright, but of course, we need to ensure that conflict is minimized and wars and guns are dropped and wars are stopped. At the moment, we see little of that, particularly as the war in Sudan continues. But there is optimism, and I think economically there is consensus around the world, including from countries such as China and the United States, that Africa is open for business and there's a huge potential for economic success.
Mr. Fakude, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. Of course, Thembisa Fakude, coming to us live there from Doha, is a senior research fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogue. She's talking to us about the significance of this day.